In the heart of Slovakia, the Carpathian Mountains rise, shrouded in mist and silence. Kaktici Castle, perched above the village of Šate, was built as a fortress of power. By the late 16th century, it had become a place of dread, its name whispered in fear. The villagers below rarely looked up at its cold, imposing walls. They hurried past, telling their children stories to keep them away from the castle's path. Strange sounds echoed from the ramparts, screams lost in the mountain storms. The castle was more than a home. It was the heart of a growing legend. This was the domain of Countess Elizabeth Báthory, one of the most powerful women in Hungary. Her family was legendary, her influence vast, but the fear she inspired was primal. The fog that wrapped the castle seemed to seep from within, a sign of the secrets it held. Travelers heard whispers. Girls went up to the castle, but not all returned. The stones of Šate absorbed the sorrow and terror of the age. Life was brutal, power absolute, but the evil rumored within these walls felt different, personal, intimate. It was a darkness born not from war, but from the will of a single woman. The fortress stood as a monument to a legend just beginning to take shape. A legend that would stain the name of Báthory forever. The villagers' fear was not just of the unknown, but of what they suspected was happening behind those walls. The castle's shadow stretched far, casting a pall over the land. The legend of the Blood Countess was about to be written in blood and fear. Kaktici Castle was no longer just a fortress. It was a prison of nightmares, and its mistress, Elizabeth Báthory, would become one of history's most infamous figures. Elizabeth Báthory was born in 1560 into one of Hungary's most powerful noble families. The Báthorys were aristocrats, producing kings, cardinals, and military leaders. Elizabeth grew up surrounded by privilege, power, and the expectation to uphold her family's legacy. She was highly intelligent, fluent in several languages, and skilled in estate management. But her world was also defined by violence. Power was maintained through force, and cruelty was common. Beauty was a political tool, and for Elizabeth, the pressure to remain youthful was immense. As she aged, the fear of losing her beauty, and thus her power, grew. At 10, she was betrothed to Ferenc Nadasdy, a renowned soldier. Their marriage united two powerful families, making Elizabeth a ruler in her own right. With her husband often away at war, she governed vast estates, including Šate Castle. She wielded absolute authority over thousands, her power unchecked. This absolute control would set the stage for the horrors that followed. The first signs of Elizabeth's cruelty were private, small acts of violence against her servant girls. In her household, a mistake could provoke a brutal response: beatings, pinpricks, or worse. Servants whispered of her unpredictable rage, learning to fear the cold glint in her eye. Punishments escalated. Hot irons, burning tongs, even biting flesh in fits of anger. The castle's thick walls hid the screams, and the girls had nowhere to turn. Elizabeth's cruelty became systematic, a grim routine. She discovered she could inflict suffering with impunity. The servants lived in constant terror, trapped within the castle. These early acts of torture were a prelude to greater horrors. The abuse of her servants became the foundation of her legend. Each terrified whisper added to the growing myth of the Blood Countess. The darkness within Šate Castle was just beginning to spread. Elizabeth's cruelty soon reached beyond her household. Young peasant girls sent to the castle for work began to vanish. At first, their disappearances were dismissed. Accidents, runaways, tragedies of poverty. But as more girls went missing, a chilling pattern emerged. The victims were always young, healthy, and often beautiful. Families sent their daughters to the castle with hope, but hope turned to grief. Fear gripped the villages. Parents hid their daughters when the countess's officials arrived. The name Báthory became synonymous with terror. Whispers spread of a malevolent force preying on the innocent. The official story claimed the girls were sent to other estates, but no word ever came back. The number of missing girls grew, dozens, then hundreds, according to later testimony. When noble daughters began to disappear, the rumors reached the royal court. The walls of Šate could no longer contain the countess's secret. The legend of the Blood Countess was now impossible to ignore. The castle had become a place of no return. Of all the tales about Elizabeth Báthory, one stands above the rest: the legend of the bloodbath. The story claims she believed the blood of young virgins could preserve her youth. After striking a servant, she noticed her skin looked younger where the blood had touched. This sparked a monstrous idea. If a few drops helped, bathing in blood would be even better. Her victims became a resource, slaughtered so their blood could fill her baths. The image of the Countess bathing in blood became the core of her myth. It's a tale of vanity turned to horror, where life itself is stolen for beauty. Whether true or not, the bloodbath story is absent from her trial records. It first appeared over a century after her death, likely as sensational embellishment. Yet, the legend persists. Too powerful to dismiss. The bloodbath has become inseparable from her identity. Elizabeth Báthory is forever the Blood Countess. Her legacy is one of horror and fascination. Survivors' testimonies describe a chamber of horrors within Chejte Castle. Elizabeth's cruelty was systematic: needles under fingernails, burning with hot irons, freezing girls in the snow. She explored the limits of human suffering, inflicting pain for its own sake. Witnesses spoke of biting flesh, breaking fingers, and relentless mutilation. The Iron Maiden, though likely a later invention, became a symbol of her alleged cruelty. Her accomplices, servants, and a local witch helped restrain victims and dispose of bodies. The variety and creativity of torture methods suggest a mind devoid of empathy. The Countess was not just a murderer, but a torturer who seemed to relish agony. The castle's walls hid unspeakable acts, turning rumor into legend. The testimonies painted her as a monster, feared by all who served her. Whether all the stories are true or not, her reputation was sealed. The horrors of Chejte Castle would echo for centuries. For centuries, Elizabeth Báthory's story has been told as that of a monstrous serial killer. Dozens of witness testimonies describe torture, murder, and a reign of terror. Her cousin, Georgi Thurzo, led the investigation that ended her crimes. But some historians now question this narrative. They suggest Báthory was the victim of a political conspiracy. As a wealthy Protestant widow, she controlled lands coveted by powerful rivals. Her conviction erased debts owed by the king and allowed her enemies to seize her estates. The investigation was led by those who stood to gain, and testimonies may have been coerced. Báthory was never given a formal trial or allowed to defend herself. The truth likely lies between legend and conspiracy. She was probably a cruel mistress, but the scale of her crimes may have been exaggerated. The Blood Countess legend is a blend of real cruelty and political ambition. Her story served the purposes of her enemies and became legend. In 1610, the rumors around Elizabeth Báthory led to her arrest by her cousin Thurzo. Soldiers searched Chejte Castle, reportedly finding dead and dying girls. Instead of a public trial, her accomplices were tortured and executed based on forced confessions. Elizabeth, protected by her noble status, was spared execution. Her punishment was unique. She was walled up in a small suite of rooms in her own castle. Only a slit remained for food and water, her world reduced to darkness and solitude. For nearly 4 years, she lived in this self-made tomb. In August 1614, she was found dead, her food untouched. She was buried without ceremony, her name already infamous. Her living burial added to the Gothic horror of her legend. The most feared woman in Hungary died alone, a prisoner of her own making. Her story ended in silence, but her legend was just beginning. The Blood Countess would haunt history forever. Elizabeth Báthory's death was only the start of her transformation into legend. Over centuries, her story has blurred fact and myth. The historical record shows she was powerful and cruel, responsible for the deaths of servant girls. But the most iconic elements, bloodbaths, the Iron Maiden, hundreds of victims, are likely later inventions. These details turned her into a Gothic horror icon, stripping away her complexity. She became a symbol of evil, inspiring vampire folklore and countless works of art. The truth is likely a mix of real cruelty and political destruction, but the myth has outgrown the facts. The Blood Countess endures as a symbol of power's corruption and the terror of mortality. Elizabeth Báthory's shadow still looms, a warning from history's darkest corners.